Hello and welcome back to the studio. This is Dawn. In today's video, we are going to be playing with gouache. Now, gouache is perfect for creating vibrant colors on dark cardstock, especially black. So let's take a look at gouache. What is it? So gouache is an opaque watercolor, so it has all of the same properties as watercolor with the exception that it is opaque versus transparent. There are several different brands you can use. Here I've got the Winsor & Newton Designer Series. This comes in a starter pack, so it's a full pack, but you can also buy these open stock individual tubes. So here there's a magenta, there's silver, there's a lot of different colors. But this primary color pack along with black and white is a great starter option because you have all of your primary colors so you can mix just about any colors that you want. And then you've also got your black and white for your tinting and then to lighten colors. Now, I will be using mostly these Holbein Artist Gouache. Now, these are a little on the pricier side, and I will say that you do not need to go with an expensive brand of gouache. Gouache is a very forgiving medium, and it's one of those that I say you can go with the cheaper one. They dry very matte, very opaque, very flat, and you don't really need to depend on that pure pigment, that luminescence like you do in watercolor. Fillers and stuff aren't really going to be an issue here because it is opaque and has a matte, flat finish anyway. Now, that being said, they are fantastic gouaches, and I do highly recommend them if you have a little bit extra to spare. So here is a gouache painting done on white. So here you can see how solid and flat that color dries back. There is none of that glow or that luminosity that you get in watercolor, although you can use these very similarly to watercolor. I love this look. It has that storybook feel, and it has traditionally been used to illustrate books, so it definitely has that nostalgic feel to it. So here I have a pan of gouache that I used to paint that first painting, and you can see these colors are dry. Now, the great thing about this is you can reconstitute these with water, just like watercolor, but you get the opacity of an acrylic paint. Acrylics, once they dry, they are permanent. You will not be able to re-wet them and reuse them, but with gouache, you can. So here I've just sprayed a little bit of water into each of these little pans to re-wet this gouache, and you can see here that it is reconstituting, and I'm going to be able to paint with this. So let's take a look at some of the properties of gouache and how you can use it more full and solid and opaque like an acrylic, or you can use it more watered down similarly to a watercolor. So here you can see I'm getting the consistency to where it's kind of like, it's between milk and cream right now. It's pretty thick. If I paint it onto the pan, it stays. It doesn't completely drip down. It holds its viscosity. It's got a little bit more viscosity, and when I paint it here, it's very thick, very solid, completely blocks out everything underneath. There is no paper shining through. But if I add some water to this and pull it out, it's going to pull out very similarly to watercolor. Now, the difference being that watercolor is transparent, so the light shines through the paint, hits the paper, bounces back, and gives almost that glow. This is just dispersing those pigments so that you can see some of the watercolor paper through it, but it's not actually letting the light shine through it, which is why you get that very flat, very opaque coverage when it dries. You can see here I can keep pulling this out when it's wet. I just add water and it will bloom out just like watercolor. So you can see here there's a couple different ways that you can use this. You can use it from its consistency as full and opaque all the way to watered down. So it has a lot of flexibility and versatility. And its opaque properties make it perfect for getting solid, vibrant, pure color on dark colored cardstock. So here today I'm using the Stonehenge Legion Cold Press Black Watercolor Paper. Now if you don't have watercolor paper, it is not a deal breaker. Especially for what we're doing today, I'm using it in more of its thicker form. So I'm not using quite as much water, so you can definitely get away with regular cardstock here. I've done it many times and it's just fine. And I've already went ahead and put my stamp in the MISC, and for that, today we're going to be using the Picket Fence Berry Christmas to You stamp set. I love the illustrative style of this set, and I think it's going to pair beautifully with the gouache. So we're going to go ahead and stamp that out. Now, I will tell you, my eyesight is not as good as it used to be. I used to be able to stamp with black on black cardstock, and I could see it just fine. This time I had a little bit of an issue, but I will show you a little bit later a little trick that I have, and it'll help tremendously if your eyesight is failing you like me. All right, I'm gonna give this good pressure all around. I'm not like forcing it. I'm not squishing the stamp. I'm just moving my fingers all around and making sure that there's contact all over the paper because again, remember this is cold pressed watercolor paper, so it does have a texture. And you can see here that you can clearly see these lines, and that is because the ink is still wet. It's dry to the touch, but the solvent in it has not evaporated away yet, which leaves the ink behind. So once that dries, it's going to be a lot more difficult to see. We're basically doing no line coloring on black, and once those lines completely dry, they all but disappear. And you'll be able to see it here in the video, so when we get to that portion, I'll point out where I finally had to stop and come up with a way to still see my lines. So I will be doing that going forward from now on, that I know that my eyesight is fading. All right, so I'm going to start by putting a little bit of this burnt umber onto the rim of my palette here. I like to put my pigments up on the rim and then mix my colors in the well. Now with gouache, you'll want to mix about as much, if not a little more, than you think you will need to paint an area. And this is because, unlike watercolor, we're going to use white to lighten our colors. In watercolor, we would just add more water to lighten a color. But again, if we just added water to this brown and we painted it on the black, we wouldn't be able to see it. We need that opaque quality of that white to lighten the color and to make it visible on the paper. So we're going to go ahead and mix up our light brown, again mixing about as much as I think I'll need and then painting. The reason that I like to mix as much as I think I'll need, if not a little bit more, is because unlike watercolor, they're opaque, they're not transparent. So if I were to need to mix a little bit more watercolor on the fly and it was just a little bit different, that's okay, because the transparent pigments would layer over each other and they would kind of gradually go into a slightly different shade. And it wouldn't be as noticeable that the color shifted. Here, when we're using opaque colors, they're definitely going to be more noticeable that the colors aren't exactly the same. And this isn't an issue because, again, like watercolor, if I have too much color on my palette, I can use a little bit of water to reconstitute it and keep using it. Whereas acrylic, once it dries, you can't re-wet it, you can't reconstitute it, it's wasted paint. So for that reason, I like to just mix about the amount that I think I'll need or a little bit more than I think I'll need. So I'm going to just continue painting around his head, filling in all of this area. Now, you'll notice that those lines are starting to get hard to see. They're definitely much harder to see than they were a minute ago. You can see me tilting the paper. It won't be long now before I need to come in and make those lines a little bit more visible for myself. I'm painting around his nose here, around his little snout. I'm leaving an area open for his eyes. With gouache, you don't even have to leave the eye area open. You could paint right over that, because another wonderful thing about gouache is you can go in whatever order you want. You can work from light to dark. You can work from dark to light. It doesn't really matter because they are opaque. You can put white over red. You can put white over black. It'll show up. I'm leaving the eyes open just so that I know where they go. Because if you don't put the eyes back in the right place, you can have a wonky looking little bear here. Okay, so anywhere that I feel like the color is a little thin, I'm just adding another layer, and now I'm going to mix up a lighter tan for his snout. So I'm just adding a little bit of white to the color that I mixed up for the bear. This is going to keep my colors consistent. I'll just use that same brown with more white added. And now I'm just going to paint in his snout. Now I've been using a number 4 round up until very soon here. I'm going to switch over to a smaller brush because I'm in a smaller area. But for doing larger areas, the number 4 was perfect. And then I'm going to switch over to, I think, a number 1. Yep, I'm going to switch over to this number 1 here. And now I'm going to paint in the smaller detail areas. I'm leaving the nose open, and then I'm leaving a little line for his mouth. I will come back in and add black over both of those areas, but for now I want to leave in the area. I want that area mapped out. Now his snout, the paint was a little thin, so I'm going to put another layer over there, and that'll just increase that opacity and really make the snout jump forward. All right, so moving on to his ears, I'm going to use the Winsor & Newton, their Flesh Tint, I believe it's called. It's this peach color. I'm going to lighten it up with a little bit of white, and then I'm just going to paint the insides of his ears. Now this will give me a nice solid base color, and then if I want to add any shadows, I can use the flesh tint without any white added to it, and it'll give me a little bit darker of that peach color. Look, old habits die hard, you guys. I'm used to working lightest to darkest, so I tend to kind of do that sometimes with my gouache as well, even though it's not necessary. Okay, so the head is done and I've reached my breaking point here. I can no longer see these lines. You can see here, even when I tilt it, remember before we were able to clearly see those lines, and they're really difficult to see now. So what I like to do is I'm going to take a mechanical pencil and I'm just going to trace over the lines. I can still see them just enough to reinforce them, but once I start adding paint to this, those lines are really going to disappear on me. So I'm just going to go over all of these lines lightly with this mechanical pencil. I like the mechanical pencils because the lead is super thin as compared to a regular pencil. So I'm just going to take this and trace over the entire design. Going forward, I will be doing this right after I stamp it. That way I know that I'm going to be able to see the design the entire time. It will take a couple extra minutes, but it's well worth it because you can see here when I tilt this, you can definitely see those pencil marks so much better than just the stamping alone. And here's a shot of the entire thing traced out. This is going to make it so much easier for me to finish this image. All right, so I've skipped ahead. I've colored in the hat and now I'm working on the bear's sweater. I've used the carmine along with just a little bit of white. I wanted to lighten that up just a bit so that I could use the true red as an extra layer anywhere I needed a little bit darker color. You can see this actually goes pretty quickly. And it depends on your comfortability, how comfortable you are with it, on how fast it goes. The more you do this, the faster it'll go. Now, technically, I haven't messed with gouache in probably about a year. This was the first time that I pulled out the gouache since last Christmas, actually. And we painted the white version in a live over on Facebook, and then I decided to do a black version here because honestly, using gouache on black, that's my favorite technique for gouache because there's really nothing else besides colored pencils, and colored pencils takes forever, y'all. Colored pencils take me forever. So the gouache is really the only thing that you can get this intense color on the dark or the black cardstock. So I just knew that I wanted to do this design on black as well. So while I paint this, we'll go over a couple other housekeeping things. I just wanted to remind you guys that the store is closing. It will close on December 31st of this year. So we are doing clearance sales. And if you've got something that you wanted to pick up, make sure you pick it up. I wanted to thank all of you guys so much for the orders that you've already placed. We are doing our best to get them out. We were a little bit behind there for a minute, but we're all caught up now, and orders should be going out in their normal time frame. Let's see what else. Oh, I wanted to thank you guys so much for all of the kind comments that you left on my, I think it was the video before last where I announced the store closing. I haven't gone through and read all of the comments yet. It was a little emotional for me to read some of those comments, so I took a little break. I will be going in and reading them and responding, though. I just wanted you all to know how much they meant to me and how much they mean to me. So many wonderful people. I've said it before, I'll say it again. We have the best community here in the crafting industry, and I'm so grateful for all of you. What else do we got? Oh, the Stitchmas, the Spellbinder Stitchmas series. I am finishing that up. There will be a blog post going up here in the next couple of days that will go over days 5 through 8. And then before the end of the month, I will have another blog post with days 9 through 12. Yeah, 9 through 12. And then I will post a picture and a link to the blog post in the community here on the YouTubes. I'll have it on the community tab. So make sure that if you want to see the rest of that series, that you're checking that out, and you can head over to the blog and see those posts to see the details of how all of it was made. So look for that. Everything will be up before the end of the month. So let's see here. We're just finishing up the white stripes on his sweater. You can see here I went over all of those little star details because we could paint right over this white. And now we're going to work on the wreath. Now for the holly in this, I'm using the leaf green. This is from the Holbein gouache set, and I'm still using that 0 brush. These are little, so they go really fast. I'm just solidly filling in the holly there with that green. And then I'm going to move on to another area just to let those dry so that I don't stick my hand in the wet paint. That's another thing about gouache. Gouache dries very quickly, so you don't have to wait too long. Now I'm grabbing some black. This is just straight black, and I'm using it to color in his nose. The tooth of the paper is going to have a different texture than the gouache itself, so that's why instead of leaving it black, the black of the paper, I used a little bit of gouache to go over that, and here I'm filling in those eyes. You can see I've made the eyes a little bit bigger and more uniform than the area that I left for them, but really again, I just left those blank spots for the markers for where to put his eyes. And because we're using gouache, I can go right over it, and there is no show through. I'm using that same brown here, that burnt umber, and I'm using it pretty much full strength right here, like straight out of the tube to put in the first layer of this. I'm gonna think of it as like grapevine, creating the circle that goes around the design here. I'm using the full strength here because I'm going to add a couple of different layers. In this way, I can keep adding white little by little to the brown just to lighten it up a little bit here and there for each layer so that I get some depth of color. So here you can see I'm added a little bit of white to it. And now I'm just kind of brokenly going over that line, going all outside of my original line a little bit here and there, thickening it up in places. And this is going to create some highlights and just make that vine look a little bit more interesting. And then again, a little bit more white, and I'll come in with another layer. So this is another way that you can quickly add detail. Because we're using so little water, the paint dries very quickly, and you can almost come in immediately right over the spot, depending on how much water you add to that paint. And then again, even more white to that brown. So now it's a very, very light tan, and adding some highlights. And again, you can see how we can build up from dark to light using gouache, which you can't do with watercolor. Watercolor, you have to work light to dark. And if I didn't like anything, I could just come and paint right over it with the darker brown and cover up any of those highlights or knock them back. So again, gouache is super forgiving. Here I've mixed up a little bit of carmine and white and put in my little berries. And then once they dry, I will add a little white highlight to them. Now all of the stuff is colored in. It's time to add some details. So here I'm going to take some white. Like I mentioned, we're going to start adding in some highlights. So I'm just getting that white started by adding some water, a little bit of blue to it. I just want a shadow color, so I can come in here and add some detail to make these look like knit stitches. And then again, taking that light pink, so that red with just a little bit of white in it, adding a highlight across the top of his sweater. So it looks like the top of his sweater at the neck there is catching some light. Mixing up some more of that red and white for just a tiny bit of a different shade. And I'm going to add some highlight detail to the hat, but I'm doing it in a scumbling motion. So I'm not doing it smooth, just doing it rough, kind of tapping the brush across the paper to get a texture. So it looks like that hat has a little bit of texture to it. Maybe it's made out of knit as well. And the same thing to the sweater here, choosing one side to make a little lighter and then fade into the darker side. And I'm going to continue doing these little details around the rest of the image. So here I've got red with just a tad of the black brown mixed in, and add a little bit of a deeper red underneath the collar so it looks like it's separated from the rest of the shirt. And again, some of that scumbling motion there to add that texture in both the bottom of the sweater and in the hat. Similarly, I'm going to do the same thing to the bear himself, give him a textured fur-like appearance. So I'm just taking a little bit of that burnt umber with less white in it now. Really thick concentration so that it skips across the paper. The paint's pretty thick and it's not flowing from my brush, so I can use the texture of the brush itself and just kind of scumble that across the paper to create a little bit of texture on the bear. And then we're going to add some highlights to those antlers. So I'll take that, what color did I use for that? Burnt sienna, add a little bit of white to it, and add some highlights on those little antlers. Now I'm mixing up a very, very light pink to put some highlights on the berries, and then a very light gray. I'll mix a little of that white with the black to add some highlights to the nose and to the eyes. And then finally, I'm going to come in with the finishing detail of the stars. Now, there are 3 tubes of gouache that I highly recommend: the gold, the silver, and the white. Even if you don't plan to ever use gouache in this fashion, the gold, the silver, and the white are great to have in your arsenal because both the metallics are perfect for adding solid details that are going to show up over any medium. And then the white is perfect as well because it can also cover up other mediums. So if you want to add white details and white highlights, white splatter in the background, gold splatter, silver, again, those 3 tubes I think are perfect and anybody can make use of them. And I think that they are the easiest to use, and a little goes a very long way. You can see there I had some gold that had dried on my palette. I just used a little bit of water to reconstitute it, get it going again, and now I can just paint these little stars on the sweater, and that gold is going to completely cover everything under it because it is opaque, and it's going to give the most beautiful metallic shine. And that's going to pretty much finish up all of the painting. You can see here everything is completely dry. We've got all of our little details added, and I just love the way this looks. And you can see when I tilt this in the light, you can see that high shine from that gold metallic gouache. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it adds just the right amount of detail. Now for the sentiment, I wanted to add something a little bit larger. Now the original stamp set has some sentiments in it, but they're small. I love the large sentiments from this St. Nick set from Honeybee Stamps. I'm going to stamp out 2 of these so that I have options. I'm not sure exactly which one I want to use, but I'm going to go ahead and do 2 of them, and then I'll decide afterwards. So for my sentiment, I am going to do my heat embossing on black cardstock. I have tried to heat emboss on that black watercolor paper. I've noticed that it does not have a lot of sizing, so the Versamark soaks right into the paper, and I have trouble with getting a good heat embossed image on it because it's like the Versamark, instead of sitting on top of the paper, soaks in, and then the embossing powder doesn't adhere to it as well. So that's my caveat with heat embossing on the black watercolor paper. I don't recommend it. So I've gone through all of the steps, treated my paper with my Rabbit Hole Designs powder tool, and now I'm just heat embossing those sentiments. I'm going to buff off the excess powder, and now I'm going to use the coordinating dies. Here's a little trick. Honeybee Stamps, if you flip the stamp set over the die, you can see here exactly which dies belong to which sentiments. So it's easy to figure out which one of these you need. So smart, right? Kelly taught me that one. I did not know, and when she taught me that, I just was like, mind blown. Such an easy thing, but so much time saved on our end, right? Oh, so good. All right, so I'm going to tape these in place, run those through my die cut machine, and then I can decide which sentiment that I want to use. So remember, I did create a white version in a Facebook Live, so let's go ahead and review both of the finished cards. And ultimately, I decided on the You're on the Nice list. I really thought that the playfulness of the sentiment matched well with the imagery in this stamp set from Picket Fence, and I just trimmed this down a little and matted it on a white card base. And then for the white card, I chose another sentiment from that St. Nick set from Honeybee Stamps. Again, the playfulness of the sentiment matched the imagery perfectly, and I love the way this one turned out as well. I went with softer colors, but I have to tell you, the way gouache just stands out on dark cardstock is unbeatable. Like, there is nothing else like it, in my opinion. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this look at gouache. Let me know in the comments below if you've ever tried it, if it's a look that you like and something you think you might try in the future. All of the products that I used will be linked in the description box below, as well as a link to a smaller, more affordable Holbein gouache set if you guys wanted to check that out. But remember, you don't have to go with super expensive gouache. You can take a look around the site and see if there is another one that is a little more economically priced that you might want to try. I will also have a link to the blog down there so that you guys can sign up for email notifications so you don't miss that Stitchmas post. And as always, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.